exhausted are the ones who are being drained of hope. And Russell has described something of what that feels like. Now, most of the exhausted majority haven't gotten exhausted because they've been engaged in national or even local politics and have lost. The reason why most in the exhausted majority are getting exhausted is not by what they're doing, but rather by what they're hearing. It's by the stories that they're consuming about politics. We perhaps have tasted a little bit of that bitterness, a little bit of that fight and exhaustion, really in our relationships with family and friends. And we know how exhausting that feels and how it does make us feel like we're losing hope. Sometimes that experience happens in face-to-face relationships with family and friends, and sometimes that happens on social media. Social media especially exhausts us. It exhausts us because social media is built on categorizing us into various us versus thems. That's how social media works. It groups us into us and thems, and then it will tee up content that makes us afraid of the them. That's how it gets clicks. Fear and anxiety are incredibly powerful motivators, and so social media knows that and tees up the latest story of how awful them is and what the latest thing that them is doing to get us. As we bathe ourselves in these kinds of us versus them stories through social media, we get exhausted. We lose hope. You see, when we consume stories on social media, we're not actually in relationship. We're not actually in relationship with the people that those stories are about. It's a false, faux relationship. The only stories that are actually real stories are stories of real relationships with people in our lives. So the Jesus practices for his how of politics involve stopping some things and starting some things. Jesus invites us to generate our own stories, stories of relationship especially with those who may differ from us politically. How can we actually conduct relationships that actually build hope in all of us? Here's a story that showcases how this happens.
I'm Nancy French, and I am married to someone you've already heard from in this course, David French. I'm a best-selling author and an investigative journalist. Being married to David is sometimes difficult when I see the way that the public perceives him, especially in social media.
I'm Kathy Kattenberg. I think I joined Twitter around 2007. I'm a political addict. I started reading National Review. David French was an editor and a writer on National Review at that time, had been for years, and I started reading David and disagreeing with him vehemently on everything. David and I disagree on abortion. That's one issue that David and I will never agree on. I'm sure of it. We will never agree on that. Well, being me, I start telling him exactly what I think. I would tweet it. Do you want women to die? Women have a right to control their own bodies. The woman is more important than the fetus. All things like that.
He's criticized sometimes for legitimate reasons, for disagreements on issues, but most of the time it is personal and it is awful.
I would get angry, and then I would respond even more angrily the next time.
In 2016, I wrote an article in the Washington Post that detailed my story of sexual abuse. I was abused by someone who was my vacation Bible school teacher. So I wrote an article. I wanted to publish it anonymously, but they don't do that at the Washington Post. And so I thought about it, decided to go ahead and publish under my name. I'd never talked about it before. The article went super viral. I got all kinds of social media response. I got emails from probably hundreds of people who told me stories of their own sexual abuse. Additionally, a lot of people criticized me. They were terribly uncharitable, and it hurt my feelings a great deal because a lot of those people were from my quote-unquote tribe. And so I decided in that moment that if anyone showed me kindness on social media, I was just going to follow them. Previously, I only followed people that I sort of ideologically aligned with, but at this point, I was like, forget it, I'm going to go with kindness. And so I started following a bunch of people. One of the people that showed me kindness was named Kathy Kattenberg.
I always knew there was a person named Nancy French, and she was married to David French. I had looked at her profile, but I didn't know anything about her. Nancy shared a very personal and very painful story of her own. She herself had had tragedy in her life, and I was just filled with compassion for her. So I wrote to her and I said something along the lines of, I don't agree with your husband on things, but I have so much respect for you and for your courage. I think it's enormously brave of you to have written an article for the Washington Post so everybody knows what happened to you.
I clicked follow, and every time I logged into Twitter, I saw her post, and she was not a huge fan of David. I just sort of scrolled past it and scrolled past it and scrolled past it. For about 4 months, every time I checked Twitter, I would see Kathy insulting David. So COVID hits, and I see a message from Kathy posted publicly, and she said, I will never eat again. I am stuck in this apartment. I cannot get groceries because of the COVID overload on the grocery delivery system. And she said, I just can't get any food. I don't think I'll ever get food. I didn't know it at the time, but Kathy was disabled and she couldn't leave her house. So Kathy posts that she's food insecure, and she was so against David. She disliked him so much. However, I sent her a direct message and I said, hi, I'm Nancy French. I'm David French's wife. I saw your post. What can I do to help?
She contacted me on Twitter, on direct message, and she offered to help.
My phone rings and it's Kathy, and she has this beautiful New York accent, and I sound like I fell off a turnip truck, and we laughed at that. And she was asking me, like, why did you reach out? And I said, this is a treacherous time. What can we do to help?
It was just astonishing to hear her voice on the phone. And we worked on finding a grocery that would deliver the food.
And that whole process was pretty funny because I had to talk to Kathy on the phone, and it was stuff like she wanted diced tomatoes, she wanted bananas, beef, just basic stuff. But when you talk to somebody about their food needs, it's very intimate. I placed the orders, nothing happened. The next day I called her back. Hey, Kathy, I'm still working on it. We talked every day. At one point, I was like, Kathy, I don't know what I'm going to do. I cannot get you food. And I said, the only thing I think we can do at this moment is to pray. And she said, okay, go ahead and pray. Well, I do not pray randomly with strangers over the phone, let alone praying with someone who I sort of considered hated us so much. So Kathy Kattenberg and I, together on the phone, prayed that God would send her food. And it was very awkward, and we laughed.
I can't believe that any human being would do something like that, so personally kind as that.
We talked about a lot of topics. The most hot button topic was abortion. We're very pro-life. She's had multiple abortions. And so she told me that story. And when we had that conversation, it was so moving to me because her story was devastating. And so instead of telling her that I disagreed with abortion, I just said, I'm very sorry for the circumstances that led up to that. And so I just showed her compassion. We worked and we worked. And finally, Kathy calls me and she's just crying. She was like, you're not going to believe it. I have, 2 pounds of meat and 4 bananas. 30 minutes later, the phone rings again. My other orders had also come through. So now she had 6 pounds of meat. She had like 25 bananas. We had probably 30 cans of diced tomato. I mean, she was just like drowning in food.
For her to take a person that she didn't trust, because I was always attacking her husband, and to call me and arrange to get me food, it was huge. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And from that point on, we were friends.
I wanted to go meet Kathy in person because we had bonded. I got invited to perform at a storytelling event at Lincoln Center, which was a huge honor for me. And I thought maybe since it was close to where Kathy lived, she might want to go.
I went to see Nancy.
I was backstage. I had to give David Kathy's cell phone number. So when she arrived, David extends his arm and he escorts her into Lincoln Center. I knew somewhere that David and Kathy were sitting together listening to my story, and that cracked me up so much. It made the whole night just sort of more magical.
He was so kind. And it was the first time that I could really see graphically that a person can think very differently from me politically and be kind. And David is very, very kind. He doesn't have a mean bone in his body. Oh my God!
Hey there! It's so good to see you.
Oh my God!
How are you doing?
I'm fine.
It's so good to see you.
And so we've kept in touch for 2 years, and we've gotten closer and closer and closer.
Nancy is the best friend that I have ever had in my life. She's not just my best friend now. I have never had a friend like Nancy before in my life.
You've heard a story of a relationship, rather than being born on social media, actually taking place with each other in real life. Now take some time to reflect on this story. How did this story make you feel?